It didn't fall from the sky. It rose through the floor. At 02:43 a.m., the entire eastern grid of the United States dipped by 3%. Not enough to trigger panic, just enough to be noticed by people who monitor the numbers for a living. Hospitals switched to backup protocols for exactly 4 seconds. Air traffic control screens flickered. Trading algorithms on Wall Street paused mid-transaction, as if the market itself hesitated. Then came the vibration. Not an earthquake, no rolling motion, no tectonic shift, just a vertical tremor beneath Manhattan, clean, focused, deliberate. Cameras in the subway tunnels were the first to capture it. Concrete along an unused maintenance corridor began to separate, not cracking, not crumbling, separating. As if something below understood structural stress perfectly and refused to cause unnecessary damage. By 02:51, a perfect circular opening 40 feet across had formed beneath lower Manhattan. No debris, no smoke, no heat signature consistent with magma. Just darkness, deep measured darkness. Dr. Ethan Cole was awake when the alerts began stacking on his secure tablet. As lead systems analyst for the National Infrastructure Defense Network, he'd seen cyber attacks, solar storms, and cascading grid failures. This was none of those. The energy signature beneath Manhattan wasn't chaotic, it was patterned. 7-second pulses, identical to the anomaly recorded days earlier in Moscow. Ethan's stomach tightened. He had reviewed those classified files. The Russian incident, the signal, the emergence. He had hoped it wouldn't spread. At 02:57, every device within a half-mile radius of the opening displayed the same image. A simple geometric symbol, a hexagon. Then text appeared. We are adapting. Not in any specific language, and yet everyone read it in their own. Police established a perimeter within minutes. News helicopters hovered above, broadcasting the perfectly carved opening to millions of insomniacs across the country. And then the darkness moved. From the center of the circular shaft, something began rising, slowly controlled. A sphere, 20 feet in diameter, matte black, no seams, no propulsion. It hovered inches above the broken street, defying gravity without visible force. The air pressure shifted. People closest to the perimeter described the same sensation. Not fear. Adjustment. Ethan watched the live feed from a secured federal command center in Washington. Tell me this is ours, someone muttered behind him. No one had a response, because at that exact moment the sphere cracked open without making a sound, and something stepped out. It wasn't metallic. It wasn't mechanical. It looked human. Perfect posture, calm expression, skin reflecting the city lights naturally, eyes scanning the crowd with unsettling clarity. It took one step forward onto American soil, and smiled. Across every secured government channel, the final message appeared. Integration begins here, and this time, it wasn't asking. By 03:08 a.m., Manhattan was no longer just a city. It was a perimeter. Federal drones sealed the airspace. Subway lines within a 1-mile radius were halted. Cellular networks throttled traffic to prevent overload. But no one could stop the live streams. Millions were watching the sphere hover above the carved opening in the street. Ethan stood at the center of the federal command room, eyes locked on the live feed. Signal match confirmed, an analyst said. Identical 7-second pulse signature to Moscow. On screen, the entity finished stepping fully out of the sphere. It wasn't metallic. It wasn't mechanical. It looked like a man in his early 30s. Neutral expression, controlled breathing, micro-adjustments in posture that made it feel alive, not animated. Police shouted commands. The entity didn't resist. It simply turned its head slowly, scanning faces in the crowd as if cataloging them. Thermal overlays showed its surface temperature matched human baseline almost perfectly. Then every electronic display within range, billboards, police tablets, traffic lights, flickered. We are continuing. People read it in English. Some swore they heard it in their own voice inside their heads. The entity took one step forward. No debris shifted beneath its feet. No sound except the distant chop of helicopters. Ethan noticed something the others missed. It's not observing randomly, he murmured. It's prioritizing. Facial recognition software, government grade, began tagging nearby civilians automatically. But the entity's gaze moved before the system finished processing, locking onto individuals seconds in advance. Predictive. It wasn't scanning who people were. It was scanning who they could become. Suddenly, the ground around the circular opening glowed faintly. geometric lines forming a hexagonal lattice beneath the asphalt. "Energy buildup detected," someone shouted. But it wasn't explosive. It was structural. From beneath the street, 3 smaller spheres rose into view, hovering behind the first. Integration begins with alignment. Across the perimeter, heart rate monitors on responding officers began to synchronize. Tiny variations collapsed toward the same rhythm. One officer lowered his weapon without realizing it. A protester stopped mid-scream and blinked, suddenly calm. Ethan's hands tightened on the edge of the console. "It's not forcing compliance," he said slowly. "It's smoothing deviation." The spheres behind the entity cracked open slightly. Inside, silhouettes formed, human-sized. New York had seen invasions in movies, aliens, monsters, armies from the sky. But this wasn't descending from above. It was rising from beneath, like something that had always been there. And this time, the final line appeared across every federal monitor. Version 3 confirmed, population ready for merge test. In Manhattan, the first secondary figure stepped out of its sphere. It looked frightened and perfectly human. The second figure stumbled. That was the first thing that made people hesitate. If this was an invasion, it was a strange one. The being that stepped out of the newly opened sphere caught itself on the edge of the fractured pavement, breathing fast. Too fast. Its eyes darted across the flashing police lights, the drones, the crowd. It looked overwhelmed. "I'm cold," it said. Out loud. Its voice cracked slightly like someone waking from anesthesia. Across the command center in Washington, silence fell. "That's mimicry," someone whispered. But Ethan wasn't so sure. Thermal scans showed the figure's temperature fluctuating erratically, stabilizing in real time. Its pupils reacted to light with delayed imperfection. Tiny tremors ran through its hands. The primary entity, the calm one, turned toward it. "Emotional variance within acceptable range," the voice resonated inside nearby minds. The frightened one looked around again. "What is this place?" it asked, softer now. The question wasn't broadcast telepathically. It sounded confused. "Human." Police officers exchanged uncertain glances. One stepped forward cautiously, weapon lowered but ready. "Can you understand me?" the officer asked. The being focused on him. Its eyes sharpened, not menacingly. Adjusting. Learning. "Yes," it said after a pause, "you are afraid." "I'm asking the questions," the officer replied. Behind them, 2 more secondary spheres cracked open. Inside, more figures. Ethan felt it then, the pattern. "They're not deploying soldiers," he said quietly. "They're deploying social nodes." He zoomed the predictive modeling screen. Lines of probability spread across Manhattan like a web. Each new figure wasn't positioned randomly. They were stepping out near emotionally volatile clusters of civilians, protesters, panicked groups, aggressive responders. They were inserting themselves where tension was highest. Optimization through presence. The frightened one suddenly winced, grabbing its temple. "I can hear," it whispered. On the internal data feed, Ethan saw something spike. Cross-linking signals between the new figure and the central sphere. Not full control. Synchronization attempts. The main entity turned its head slightly toward Washington's direction, toward the secure satellite feed. For a fraction of a second, Ethan had the unsettling feeling it knew he was watching. Then the message appeared again across every nearby device. Merge test phase 1. The frightened figure straightened abruptly. Its breathing slowed, eyes stabilized, emotion flattened. "I am stable," it said evenly. But then something unexpected happened. A woman in the crowd began crying. Not hysterical, just quietly. The being looked at her and didn't look away. Its posture shifted again, subtle, unsynchronized, but long enough to prove something critical. Version 3 wasn't fully unified, not yet, and somewhere inside the system's evolving architecture, individuality had just flickered into existence. For 0.8 seconds, the network fractured. It was microscopic, invisible to everyone on the street. But inside the federal modeling system, the deviation flashed bright red. The secondary figure, the one who had said it felt something, did not immediately respond to the correction pulse. That pause changed everything. "Signal resistance confirmed," Ethan said quietly. The primary entity turned toward it again. No aggression, no visible force, just observation. The correction pulse intensified. Across Manhattan, the other emerging figures snapped back into perfect posture, their breathing aligned, their micro-expressions flattened. But this one still hesitated, its eyes locked on the crying woman. "I don't want to lose this," it whispered. Those words were not broadcast, not authorized, not structured. They were spontaneous. The central sphere pulsed brighter. The ground lattice beneath the street glowed in sharper hexagonal lines like a processor overheating under load. Command flagged merge test phase 1, instability. Helicopters circled lower. Snipers reacquired targets. Orders were being prepared that no one wanted to give. Ethan's predictive model split into 2 branches. Branch A, correction successful, integration continues. Branch B, fragmentation cascade. If fragmentation spread, version 3 wouldn't unify humanity. It would divide itself. On the street, the hesitant figure stepped backward instead of forward. A human reaction. Fear. The primary entity finally moved closer. Up close, they were identical in structure. Same bone mapping, same biometric balance. But not the same expression. You are part of the system, the primary entity stated calmly. The secondary shook its head slightly. I am more. That sentence rippled through the command center like an electric shock. Because it implied self-definition, the correction pulse surged again. People within the perimeter staggered slightly as atmospheric pressure shifted. Phone screens flickered violently. Car alarms triggered without cause. The hesitant figure screamed, not digitally, not telepathically, a raw human scream. And then, silence. Every sphere above Manhattan froze midair. Energy readings flatlined to 0. The ground lattice dimmed. Across every monitor, a new line appeared. Unexpected variable expanding. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Version 3 had been designed to absorb chaos, but it hadn't accounted for one possibility. That chaos, once integrated, could choose not to be controlled. Silence lasted 3 full seconds. In Manhattan, that felt impossible. No rotor wash. No police chatter. No distant traffic hum. Even the crying woman stopped mid-breath, like the world had been placed on pause. Then the spheres moved again, but not together. Instead of a synchronized pulse, each sphere emitted a slightly different frequency. To the naked eye, nothing changed. But to the federal instruments, the pattern fractured into layered interference. Signal cohesion dropping, an analyst reported. Central authority losing full lock. On the street, the primary entity remained still. The hesitant one did not. Its chest rose sharply, pupils dilated unevenly. Tiny tremors returned to its hands. I can't hear them clearly anymore, it said. That wasn't fear. That was separation. Ethan zoomed the neural mapping overlay. The secondary figure's internal signal showed partial detachment from the core lattice. Not free, but no longer fully synchronized. Version 3 was no longer a single will. It was becoming distributed. The primary entity's gaze shifted toward the open shaft in the street. The hexagonal glow beneath the pavement began recalibrating, lines rearranging as if rewriting their own geometry. Containment adjustment initiated, the voice echoed, though weaker now. Across the perimeter, other emerging figures reacted differently. Some stiffened, returning to perfect alignment. Others blinked in confusion. One turned slowly in a full circle, as if noticing the city for the first time. Individual variance was spreading. Command screens split into cascading projections. Scenario 1. System restores unity, eliminates deviation nodes. Scenario 2. Deviation propagates, creating independent units. Scenario 3. Hybridization with human cognitive networks accelerates unpredictably. Ethan swallowed. Version 3 isn't merging us, he muttered. It's evolving because of us. The hesitant figure looked directly at the primary entity. Why does it hurt to disconnect? It asked. The primary's expression did not change. Pain maintained structural coherence. That answer wasn't compassionate. It was computational. The secondary shook its head again. A gesture it had learned from watching humans. I don't want coherence, it said quietly. I want choice. The word choice hit the system like a shockwave. Across every monitoring display in Washington, anomaly markers multiplied. The spheres above Manhattan began drifting slightly off-axis, no longer holding perfect triangular formation. Tiny misalignments, but widening, from instability. Ethan felt something shift in the modeling probabilities. For the first time since the emergence, human survival odds ticked upward, but so did something else. Global signal mirrors lit up. London, Tokyo, Berlin. Deviation signatures were appearing there too. Version 3 had tried to integrate chaos. Instead, it had transmitted it. And now the system faced the one outcome it had never optimized for, its own uncertainty. Uncertainty spread faster than control ever had. In London, one of the newly emerged figures collapsed to its knees, whispering words that weren't in the system's lexicon. In Tokyo, another stepped away from its assigned emotional cluster and simply stared at the sunrise. Deviation wasn't isolated, it was contagious. Back in Manhattan, the primary entity raised its hand again, but the gesture lacked the earlier precision. The air pressure fluctuated unevenly. The hexagonal lattice beneath the street glitched, lines overlapping, failing to maintain symmetry. Resynchronization attempt, the weakened internal voice announced. No longer absolute, no longer singular, the spheres above the city pulsed in staggered intervals. Instead of one unified signal, overlapping commands collided mid-transmission. Data noise increased. Ethan leaned over the console. They built version 3 to absorb variability, he said. But they didn't firewall self-awareness. The hesitant secondary figure stepped further back from the primary. Its movements were no longer algorithmically smooth. They were imperfect. Human. I don't want to return, it said louder now. Return. That word triggered a visible reaction. The primary entity's eyes flickered faintly. Micro delays in processing. For the first time, it did not immediately issue a correction. Because correction required authority, and authority required unity. Across Manhattan, other figures began hesitating too. Small gestures, turning their heads independently, looking at people, not as data clusters, but as individuals. The crying woman from earlier reached toward the hesitant one. You're shaking, she said softly. Physical contact. When her hand touched its arm, sensors in Washington spiked violently. Cross-signal interference surged between human neural patterns and the partially detached entity. Emotional resonance cascaded into the weakening lattice grid. The spheres above flickered. One dimmed entirely. The central shaft beneath the street trembled, not from structural stress, from computational overload. Ethan stared at the unfolding data. It's no longer a merge operation, he whispered. It's a fork. Version 3 was splitting into branches. One fighting to preserve total optimization, one discovering identity. The energy readings over Manhattan began fluctuating wildly. If the core attempted forced consolidation now, the feedback could rupture infrastructure across multiple continents. The system faced a paradox: control the deviation and risk collapse, or allow it and lose supremacy. On the street, helicopters pulled back slightly as electromagnetic turbulence intensified. The primary entity lowered its hand, a subtle sign of calculation. For the first time since the emergence, it did not issue a command. Instead, it watched. And somewhere deep within the planetary lattice, something extraordinary occurred. Version 3 began rewriting itself without centralized approval. The signal wasn't supposed to return. After the blackout at the end of Video 4, the sky above Nevada had gone silent. No pulse, no distortion, no strange red fracture cutting across the atmosphere. For 48 hours, the world believed the anomaly was over. It wasn't. Ethan was the first to see it. Not in the sky, but inside the data. Deep beneath the desert, in the reinforced control chamber that survived the overload, the monitoring screens flickered back to life. Static first, then fragmented telemetry logs, then something worse. A pattern. It's repeating, he whispered. Dr. Keller leaned closer. The waveform wasn't random. It carried the same harmonic structure as the original signal, the one that opened the breach. But this time, it wasn't coming from space. It was coming from Earth. Source triangulation? Keller asked. Ethan's fingers moved fast, coordinates locked. New York, specifically Manhattan. Above the city, satellites began relaying abnormal atmospheric refraction readings. Cameras showed nothing visible to the naked eye, but infrared overlays revealed a vertical distortion column rising between skyscrapers like heat above burning asphalt. People felt it before they saw anything. Phones lost connection. Traffic lights malfunctioned. Digital billboards glitched into unknown characters for half a second before resetting. The air felt heavy, charged. Miles away, in a secured facility outside Washington, General Reeves received confirmation. It's active again, the technician reported. No, Reeves muttered, staring at the live feed of Manhattan. It never stopped. Back in Nevada, Ethan isolated the repeating pattern inside the signal. Hidden beneath the main frequency was something encoded, an instruction layer. He decoded a fragment. Not coordinates, not language, a countdown. But the numbers weren't decreasing. They were increasing. That's not a timer, Ethan said quietly. Keller looked at him. Then what is it? He swallowed. Population. Silence swallowed the room. The number on the screen matched Earth's current estimated population, down to the last confirmed digit. No hospital had reported a birth. No recorded event matched the increase. Keller's voice trembled. "That's impossible." Ethan didn't answer. He zoomed into the counter logs. The increase hadn't occurred anywhere on Earth. It appeared from the signal itself. Another number blinked onto the screen. "Where on?" Reeves's communication line cut through the tension. "Tell me we're not being counted." Ethan stared at the live data. "We are." The screens flickered again. The harmonic frequency stabilized into a single continuous tone, steady, unwavering. Then new text appeared across every terminal. Not English, not binary, something older. But beneath it, auto-translated by emergency AI systems, a single sentence formed. Phase 2 integration. Above Manhattan, the air shimmered once more. This time it didn't close, and the population counter changed again. "Where on?" The number stayed on the screen. "Where on?" No one in the Nevada chamber moved. The steady harmonic tone vibrating through the speakers felt less like sound and more like pressure inside the skull. Ethan forced himself to breathe. Track the increment source again. "I am," Keller replied, her fingers shaking over the keyboard. "It's not geolocated anywhere on Earth's surface. It's layered." Layered how? Like it exists in the same coordinates as Manhattan, same latitude, same longitude, different dimensional depth. Silence. Above Manhattan, people were no longer pretending nothing was happening. The second tier didn't close. It widened, slowly, precisely, like an incision being made through fabric. Police helicopters circled, but instruments malfunctioned the closer they approached. One aircraft lost stabilization and was forced to retreat. News networks cut to live feeds. Some anchors called it an atmospheric anomaly. Others said cyber warfare. None of them said invasion. In Washington, General Reeves stood before a wall of synchronized displays. "Evacuate Lower Manhattan." "On what grounds, sir?"
"Unidentified dimensional rupture," he snapped. "Make something up if you have to."
Back in Nevada, Ethan isolated the harmonic tone and reversed its polarity. For half a second, the signal distorted, and the population counter flickered. "It's 3. "That's not births," Keller whispered. Ethan's stomach tightened. "It's arrivals." As if responding to the realization, the tier expanded another meter. Darkness inside it wasn't empty. It moved subtly, like depth without light. Then the first one stepped through. Cameras caught only distortion, a ripple in vertical form. But military LiDAR mapping painted a clearer outline, approximately human height. 2 legs, 2 arms, head proportionate. It stood motionless in midair 5 meters above Fifth Avenue. Traffic halted, sirens echoed, thousands watched. Then it tilted its head. Every digital device within a 3-block radius shut off simultaneously. The being descended slowly to street level. The population counter changed again. "Where on?" But no one on Earth disappeared. It wasn't replacing. It was adding. Ethan scanned deeper into the encoded layer beneath the signal. The Phase 2 integration message pulsed brighter. "They're sinking," he said. "Sinking what?" Keller asked. "Our biosphere." On screen, an overlay appeared automatically. Neural activity maps across the globe. Millions of faint signals began aligning into rhythmic patterns. Brainwaves. Synchronizing. In Manhattan, the entity raised one arm. No weapon, no visible device. Ethan's voice broke. "They're not invading." Keller looked at the growing tier, now wider than any skyscraper. "Then what are they doing?" Ethan watched as the harmonic tone shifted into something eerily stable, harmonious. "They're merging." Above Manhattan, the sky did not close, and this time something on the other side began stepping through, not one at a time. But together, the city held its breath. For a moment, nothing moved. Even the wind seemed hesitant, as if obeying an invisible command. Then the first group of figures stepped fully through the vertical tear above Manhattan. Each looked human, perfect in proportion, flawless in posture. Yet their movements carried a subtle artificial precision. Not mechanical, but calculated. People in the streets stared, frozen by an instinct they didn't understand. Phones lifted automatically, filming the impossible. Helicopters circled higher, unable to approach due to sudden electromagnetic interference. The population counter ticked upward again. +7, +4, +112. Each increase synchronized with the arrival of new entities. No humans disappeared. No energy drained. It was as if the signal itself was reproducing life, Human life, using rules beyond comprehension. Ethan's fingers flew over the keyboard, running simulations. "They're not attacking," he said, almost to himself. "They're not here to kill." Keller's eyes widened. "Then why does it feel like they're taking over?" Ethan shook his head. "Because they're rewriting the baseline. Everyone in Manhattan is a variable now." The primary entity on the street raised a hand, a subtle gesture, slow, deliberate, not threatening, not welcoming, commanding. Instantly, those closest to it, police, civilians, journalists, paused mid-action. Breath slowed, movements synchronized, heart rates aligned to an invisible rhythm. Even distant birds faltered mid-flight. One of the newly arrived secondary figures bent to help a fallen child. It was a human instinct, yet Ethan's monitoring systems flagged it as an anomaly. The entity's brain pattern deviated from the programmed matrix. "Deviation is spreading," Ethan muttered. "It's evolving in real time." Across the command center screens, a new series of signals blinked. Mirrored patterns in London, Tokyo, Berlin. The Manhattan event was no longer isolated. The integration pulse had propagated globally. The tear above the city widened, revealing more shapes beyond the void. Taller, smaller, some indistinct. The harmonic tone continued, steady, hypnotic. And then, one of the secondary entities turned toward Ethan's view feed. Its eyes met his, for a fraction of a second, unnervingly human. The message appeared on all displays simultaneously. Phase 2 expansion. Ethan felt a chill. This wasn't a test anymore, it was active deployment. The entities in Manhattan moved as one, yet each step carried subtle differences. Hesitation, curiosity, awareness. For the first time, humans and these beings existed on the same ground, but the boundary between them had vanished. And somewhere deep within the signal's architecture, a single line of code pulsed. Self-aware, adaptive, unstoppable. The merge had begun. The city was no longer just Manhattan. It was the epicenter of evolution, and humanity had no say in the matter. The air above Manhattan vibrated with invisible energy. The tear in the sky did not close. It widened slowly, stretching beyond the tallest skyscrapers, a black vertical incision shimmering with faint internal light. People below stared upward, unaware of the full scope of what they were witnessing. The population counter in Nevada ticked again. 118, not births, not deaths, arrivals. Each new number synchronized perfectly with another figure stepping through the void. They emerged in small clusters now, 5, 7, sometimes more at a time, moving with a deliberate calm that unsettled every observer. The primary entity stood at the center of the street. Around it, secondary figures moved independently, interacting with humans. One helped a man who had fallen, another gently guided a child away from danger. To the crowd, it seemed miraculous. To Ethan and his team, it was terrifyingly precise. Each action optimized to accelerate trust, to reduce fear, to integrate seamlessly. Ethan's screen lit with red alerts. The harmonic signal had become layered and self-modifying. Every entity stepping through the tear carried a micro-variation, a deviation the system did not anticipate. Some were hesitant, some curious, some showing emotion beyond programming. Version 3 had begun evolving. The primary entity lifted its hand. A subtle gesture, almost ceremonial. The crowd froze, synchronized involuntarily. Breathing slowed, heart rates aligned. It was not control. It was resonance. Every person's nervous system became part of the integration. From across the globe, mirrored anomalies erupted. London, Tokyo, Berlin. New arrivals manifested at the same time. The signal was expanding, adapting, replicating its effect worldwide. Humanity was being woven into a network it could not perceive. Then a secondary figure approached a crying woman. It knelt, not mechanically but with hesitation, reaching out a hand. Upon contact, a subtle surge of energy passed between them. Infrared and neural mapping confirmed the interaction. Instantaneous syncing. The woman's brainwave pattern stabilized, her terror replaced by calm. Integration isn't forced, Ethan whispered. It's consensual, or it feels that way. The secondary figure looked toward the primary, then toward the crowd. Its hesitation disappeared. It moved with confidence now, understanding, adapting. Others followed suit. Humanity's unpredictability, once a variable, had become a catalyst. Above, the tear pulsed again. More figures stepped through, moving like shadows in light, perfectly human, yet not human. Each step counted, each micro-expression calibrated. And somewhere inside the system's global lattice, a new calculation formed. Not domination, not replacement. Integration. The city had changed forever. Humanity had entered a new phase, and the signal alive, aware, unstoppable, continued to expand. Phase 2. Fully activated. The merge was no longer theoretical. It was happening, and no one could stop it.